Thank you all for joining. I actually have quite a bit of content to go through, so I'm going to jump right into it. Um, I'm Eric Steinhoff. I've been in various credit risk roles for over 20 years and have been with Scienaptic for about a year now. And I always like to start these, if you've attended any of my previous webinars, I always like to start these kind of with a level setting, giving background on where we are today. So I have two charts here. On the left is the unemployment rate dating back from December 19 through the most recent numbers, December 20. And then on the right, I have GDP growth rate compared to previous year. And I think we all know this story, but again, just to level set again, unemployment spiked immediately after the pandemic. It has actually steadily come down. We have not seen a second spike, even despite the second spike in COVID infections at the end of the year. And GDP, I think the numbers just came out last week. For the full year, it was a, very bad year in terms of GDP growth or negative growth. But overall, I think if you were to show me or most Americans these numbers back in April, they would have been happy with this outcome. So I think all things considered, we're in a much better place economically than we expected to be at this time. And what I'm here to talk about is I think there are positive indicators for 2021, even above and beyond this, and how can you, as a lender or a credit professional, make sure that you're positioning yourself to make good decisions in this, what I anticipate and hope to be a growth environment. That said, there is still a very disproportionate impact we've seen with this recession, specifically with regards to wage growth in the lowest earning quartile of Americans. You can see, comparing the last 4 recessions, including this COVID crisis, the higher earners tend to be relatively unimpacted. This is not new that the highest earning people come out of recessions relatively unscathed. What is new is the depth of pain felt by the lowest earning quartile and really the second lowest as well. So this is a tale of two economies. We are definitely seeing this. And as we know on the right, a lot of that pain was felt by people in service industries, which have been dramatically adversely impacted by the inability to be close with other humans. Leisure, hospitality, other services suffered quite a bit. There has been some rebound, but there's still a pretty big gap between pre-pandemic and today employment levels. And we see that trickling over into other industries as well. Construction still remains down relative to pre-pandemic levels, construction employment levels. Professional business services and financial activities, government workers have all kind of clawed back any losses felt. And so now what is the outlook? So I have 2 different sources here. The CBO actually came out with this information 2 days ago, so this is pretty fresh off the press. Anything past that dotted line, that vertical dotted line here, is projection. We see, actual growth way down during the recession. The gray sections are recessionary times. But the forecast, even by our Congressional Budget Office, even with a more modest stimulus plan or relief plan, as I prefer to call it, in 2021, anticipate heavy GDP rebounding. The chart on the right was sourced from Deloitte, who had done, I think they released this back in December, where they ran 3 scenarios of economic growth over the next 4 or 5 years. They called them baseline. Oh, sorry, I think these are mislabeled. There's the long slog, which is this bottom blue line. Baseline is their median forecast, what they anticipate to happen. And then there's, a chance for a fast return to the starting line, and that's approximately by kind of Q1 2022, where we would be, if you had drawn a straight line through historical GDP where we would expect to be had we not had the pandemic or any other recessions. Um, I think it's important to note this, expansionary times. I think a lot of people were projecting recessions would occur sometime around now. I certainly would have bet money that would have occurred before 2020, back in 2010, 11. Um, but I think I think indications are that we're actually looking at a macroeconomic scenario that doesn't feel that dissimilar from other recession, post-recession growth outcomes. Now, there are some cautionary notes I'll put here, key risks at the bottom. On the bottom right, there is the threats of the new vaccine resistant strains, or that the new strains are vaccine resistant, or that they will continue to mutate to become vaccine resistant. I don't think there's any evidence that that's true today, which is why I remain fairly bullish. I have a quote here: the virus mutations may significantly increase the bar for herd immunity. That's more of a delay of results. So rather than things getting back to normal this summer, maybe it takes until next winter for us to reach herd immunity through the vaccination programs. And then there is a risk that consumers will still stay indoors and not spend like they were pre-pandemic, even after receiving the vaccine. And I have some worries here. There's a lot of mixed messaging coming out. There's a lot of headline grabbing articles talking about, you need to still be cautious even after receiving the vaccine. I think that's true today. Not going to be true once, 30, 40, 50% of Americans have received the vaccine. I think things should start to change. And over on the bottom left here, there's actually a lot of opportunity for growth, specifically due to pent-up demand. And I have another slide here later that talks about this, but the bullet point here, the headline is that American households have 1 trillion more in checking accounts today than they did a year ago. And that's not an insignificant number, even if you divide it by all the Americans out there. This indicates that Americans, I would posit that Americans are in a better financial situation than they have been in recent memory. And so with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into a poll. I actually have added the slide here because I think I forgot in one of my previous webinars to launch the poll in time. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. What I have here are 4 questions that I'd like you all to fill out related to how bullish your outlook is on economic growth for the next kind of 3 years. Are you in that long slog camp or the fast return camp? I also like to hear about, I assume most of you work at lenders. How does your current origination strategy compare to pre-pandemic? Are you back to where you were? Are you more aggressive, or are you still being a little more cautious? Then how well positioned do you think you are to grow when the economy, once you're confident the economy has rebounded? And generally just what kind of concerns you might have about your ability to grow, or what would be holding you back. And so I'll let you continue to answer those in the background while I proceed, because I think there's some more interesting information here to support my current forecast, which I am not an economist, but my current thinking that the groundwork has been laid for a very robust recovery from this pandemic-induced recession. So this slide, I thought, and the next one, was very telling, and I was not even aware of the degree to mortgage debt service relative to either GDP or income, and how much it had dropped since the previous recession. So while mortgage balances are back to where they were in, say, 2008, as you can see here on the left, in terms of as a percent of GDP, obviously the GDP has grown over the last 10 years. And you can see as a percent of GDP, mortgage balances are very low and back in line with what they would have been pre that what we all now know is a bubble created between kind of 2001 and 2008. Similarly, non-mortgage household debt is not really growing that much and is in a pretty stable position like it has been even through the last recession. We know the last bubble was caused by a run-up in mortgage debt. Non-mortgage debt is, I would argue, pretty healthy relative to GDP, and I'll show it on the next slide as well, relative to income. Student loans, we know, have been a problem, and loan growth has been pretty steady in the student loan space, and there's a lot of action that could be taken on the government's part to help alleviate that, which would actually benefit those of us who are doing lending outside of student lending, because I think any increased capacity for debt servicing achieved by alleviating student loan burdens probably presents growth opportunities for the rest of us. But I would just, looking at this chart, this lays the groundwork for the fact that people are not in a bad position. And then what this chart does is overlays what happened in 2020, which we can see that mortgage debt service payments as a percent of disposable income are way down, even above and beyond the trend that I showed on the previous slide, which was showing a steadying decline back to 1980 levels. We are now below that. And household debt service payments as a share of income, way down relative to previous trends. Now, you can't totally read into this that every American is now better off, because we know income is now more disproportionately distributed in the U.S. than it was in 1980. So there are, very wealthy people helping out these ratios. That said, I don't think it's a bold argument to make that American consumers are in a better position now than they have been, at least in the last 20 years. And then the last slide before I come back to share the poll results with all of you talks about just what I think could happen in terms of economic growth, output, and specifically what I think is most interesting to most of us on this call, which would be growth of consumer indebtedness, or the opportunity to grow your lending portfolio. What we see here is, and this is not illustrative. I know there's no timeline on here, but there is the forced savings is real. The pent-up demand is projected. This does come from one state's economic analysis group. But what I believe, I would argue they're being conservative here as well. You see pre-pandemic that spending outpaced income, and we know the American consumer does not hesitate to spend more than they have. This projection has spending coming out below income in the long term. To me, that insinuates that there is a changing in the consumer mindset, that Americans become more savers than spenders. I'm not so convinced. I think memories are short, and what I actually expect to happen personally is that the pent-up demand will see spending come closer to the old baseline than staying below income levels. And if that happens, I actually believe that incomes will rebound more healthily, right? So if there's more spending out there, that creates more jobs, and that should create more income, which again will push all of these lines up. So I'm actually fairly bullish, given the hole we've dug, the opportunity presented by the fact that consumers have made prudent economic decisions with regards to increasing savings rates, and the fact that there is absolutely pent-up demand. I can speak personally. I haven't been on a real vacation in 11 months, and I would very much love to go on vacation. And the minute I get the vaccine and my wife has the vaccine, I fully anticipate to getting back to spending on travel. I plan to go out to restaurants more frequently. I personally have pent-up demand. I think I can speak for most Americans that that's the case, and so I do think there's real upside here from an economic standpoint. Again, these opinions are mine only, but this is kind of the groundwork I wanted to lay out. Now, before going on to the rest of my polls, the rest of my slides, I would like to share the preliminary results of the poll. I think there's about 72% of you have voted, so not everyone has voted, so I won't end the poll yet, but I'll share the results verbally now, and then at the end, I will share them broadly, I'll end the poll and share the results with you. So bullishness in 2022 to 2025 is probably in line with what I would have expected. 25% of you long slog, 25% fast return, and 50% baseline. So pretty normal distribution there, not too surprising. In terms of current origination strategy relative to Feb 2020, pretty evenly mixed here. 33% of you are more aggressive. 28% are in the same position as Feb 2020, and 39%, a little more than a third, are more conservative today than they were in Feb of 2020. Level of confidence, are you well positioned to grow when you're confident the economy has rebounded? Most of you are. 78% think that you are well positioned to grow. Only 5% no, and 16% unsure. And then finally, what concerns you most or is holding you back from growing more aggressively in 2021? Unsurprisingly, 73% of you just called out general uncertainty or cautiousness. 19% that risk scoring tools are inadequate, and 8% say that it's access to capital funding. And I know that was a pretty limited choice there. So I think the general uncertainty, cautiousness probably captures all of the others as well. But those were probably in line with what I would have expected. And again, I'll keep that poll open for a few more minutes and then end the poll and share the results with you once we've seen hopefully closer to 80, 90% of you completed it. We're at 71% today. Okay, then jumping back into the next section. So I think I've laid the groundwork again. I am fairly bullish on economic outlook for the next few years. I am not an economist, but I do think that all indicators, aside from another exogenous shock, are that we will see either steady, slow growth, or I'm of the opinion more rapid, kind of quick rebound growth to pre-pandemic unemployment. Well, pre-pandemic GDP, unemployment I do think will be a slower recovery. And so what does all this mean for lending in 2021? This is what we care about, right? So I've laid the background. I've explained where we are, what many project, my point of view. But what does this mean if you are trying to lend in 2021, 2022? And the first thing I'll say is, as credit people, as credit executives, and I've said this, I think, in one of my blog posts back earlier in the pandemic, that it's our job as credit people to tighten credit when things get bad, and that's actually the easy thing to do. So I've worked in my role at Scienaptic. I work with many different lenders, and I think just about all of them tightened at some point in 2020. Some have opened back up to where they were, but the vast majority remain at a slightly tighter credit risk appetite than they were in, say, February of 2020. And I'll make the argument or the statement, having sat in that seat, so I think I speak with some credibility, that it's easy to say, oh crap, unemployment shooting up, GDP shrinking, a lot of uncertainty created by the pandemic. Let's tighten originations. And that can be as simple as saying, we used to approve people down to 620. Now we're going to approve down to 660. I'm talking about FICO score. Can also be what I recommended in one of my white papers and in previous webinars, can also be adding hurdles to apply. So one of my big beliefs in 2020, and it's easier said than done, obviously, was that the impact of the pandemic was going to be disproportionate, and it's probably not the best strategy to treat all Americans with the same broad brush and just tighten universally. What would be a better targeted approach, what would have been a better targeted approach in 2020, was to maybe add income verification or bank account balance verification through tools like Plaid. Ways to verify that if someone's applying for credit, they still have a job, they still have a way of paying you back, rather than just tightening FICO on the margin. Really making sure that you stop lending to people who have been directly impacted by the pandemic, and you continue lending to people who are able to continue earning an income, maybe working from home. We all have experienced a change in that, but some of us can continue to earn the same income pre-pandemic, and if I were a waiter or a flight attendant, I might have seen significant cutback in my earnings power. Now, we all know that the government intervention in 2020 helped prevent the loss increase that we all expected. And I didn't have slides there because this presentation was already getting pretty long. But I think we all also know that losses were at near historic lows in 2020 because the government acted quickly and was able to prop up those who lost employment through unemployment and direct checks to American consumers. So if you didn't take my advice and you continued lending, you probably actually ended up okay. But I will say that the challenge facing us now, and the thing that the time when we should earn our paycheck, is how to confidently open up again when we see indications that the economy is growing. And I think there are certainly early indications that that's going to happen. And I think as good news continues to come in, we're doing ourselves and our organizations a disservice if we keep 2020 strategies or keep viewing the world through the lens of the uncertainty created by the pandemic. I'm not saying we're there today, but I'm saying at some point in 2021, I think we should be more confident about the economic growth outlook. Few things I just want to highlight again. Blunt instruments like FICO won't work. I talked about that. I have some data here to support this as well. The number of confounding influences that I just talked about, people who are unemployed but still able to make debt payments, balances, checking account balances going up, credit card balances going down, means that FICOs have increased. For some people, that's reflective of their true underlying risk. For others, that's artificial. I also want to call out that models built on a pre-pandemic time period, which is probably all models out there just about, will be off. And I think there's reason to think that they will overpredict risk for a certain subset, because I think the American consumer is better off if they're employed than they were pre-pandemic, certainly with regards to debt levels and affordability. I think your models may be too cautious. And then finally, really how, and I want to talk about this, and this is the delicate and the hardest part of what I'm recommending. How can you delineate between those who are stable and employed and vulnerable and either unemployed or still at risk of losing their employment in 2021? So what I want to do is turn back and say, what can we learn from 2008? And first, I'll show you what has happened with FICO scores since then. We can see post 2008 recession, really 2007, 2008 recession, FICO did dip, and this is just the average credit score of Americans. It did dip, and it took 3 years to get back to pre-recession levels. And then since then, as we've seen economic growth steadily, we've seen steady GDP growth over the last 10 years. You see FICOs go up in line with GDP growth. I don't think this is artificial. I think the average American consumer, based on a lot of the data I showed before, was becoming lower risk, certainly relative to 20 years ago. However, this jump in 2020, I'm not sure how accurate it is, and I'm not sure how many people are lower risk and that's being reflected versus are artificially appearing lower risk because of things like external government intervention. And that's where we have to be cautious. And FICO, we all use it. It's a very important tool, but it is a blunt instrument. The other thing I call out here is just looking at 2019 to today, January of 20, well, I guess it's now Feb, but the stat was from January of 2021. We've seen a growth in people considered prime to super prime, so everybody other than near prime and subprime, go from 59% of American consumers to 64%. And maybe that's true, but I think that piece is probably unlikely because of the slide I showed earlier about the disproportionate impact of this recession. So I think those who have maintained employment through the recession, the top earners, the top 50% of earners, probably are better risk, and this growth in average FICO is a true reflection of their more stable credit position and affordability position. For the lower income people who have been supported by a government safety net, those may now appear like they have gone from near prime to prime, but I'm not sure that that's actually indicative of their true levels of long-term risk. And we know from 2008 that this happened. So learning number one, I'm going to call out 3 learnings here that I want to highlight that I think we can use to inform how we adapt our strategies in 2021 and beyond. In 2008, we know that FICO kind of broke down. And so average FICO of loans that defaulted versus performed, and this is subprime mortgage defaults. So this is ring fenced to a specific sector, but I think it's indicative of some of the problems with over reliance on FICO. In 2008, there was a very powerful risk splitting observed, but sorry, 2003, very powerful risk splitting observed by FICO. People who defaulted were 30 plus points lower risk than those that performed. In 2006, that difference was very modest. FICO was not able to accurately identify those who defaulted in the first 12 months on subprime mortgages. And similarly, over here on the right, I have, these are a bias sample. These are people who took a subprime mortgage. Even some 700 plus people took those. These would have been some of those ninja loans. But you can see that 1 year after origination by FICO score group, the delinquency rate, I'd argue that at 2.8% for a 700 plus who's taking a subprime mortgage is probably a true long-term expected probability of default. 11% means that those people probably shouldn't have been scored 700 plus. They probably had made a lot of risky decisions in between 2005 and 2007 that could have predicted their loan performance outside of just the mortgage crash, and FICO didn't pick it up. So we have data points to validate that we know that FICO's inherent biases and the fact that it's trying to be everything for everyone, severely underpredicted credit losses, and especially in the subprime space, right? There's less opportunity for model predicting power in the 720 plus space. FICO works pretty well there. Most of those people aren't going to default, even putting aside this chart here on the bottom right. If you're getting other indicators like they're taking subprime mortgages, maybe that's not as maybe they're not truly 720 plus. But the real power of risk modeling, or the value driven by the power of better risk models, comes in the sub 700 space, I would argue, and I'd say that's where FICO is weakest. Another learning we had from pre or post 2008 was that banks stopped lending, right? And this is typical for a recession. Everyone pulls back. A lot of us did it. Most of us did it. Like I said, all the clients I've worked with made some sort of tightening, even if they quickly went back to pre-pandemic originations. But what we saw post 2008 is the banks were very slow and very hesitant to grow back in terms of debt levels, total bank loans, to the trend they were on previously. And there's a lot of factors influencing this. It's not just that banks got scared of their own shadows. There were changes in regulatory balance sheet requirements, loan loss reserve requirements. A lot of factors driving this, but the reality is, and I don't want to dig into that too much, the reality is that there was a gap post 2008 created by banks, and fintechs really came in and helped fill that gap. And so the chart on the right just shows fintech versus traditional new trades by origination month. And you can see that fintechs went from, in 2015, which is kind of early days, less than 5% of new trades, up to say, actually, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong axes, 20% in early days, up to almost 50% of new trades originated by fintechs. And a vacuum, when lenders pull back, there is opportunity for other people to step in. And I'm using this not to say that fintechs are great or anything related to comparing banks to fintechs, although you might accuse me of that in a couple of slides. What I'm saying is that when the economy grows, some people, some lenders will take advantage of that opportunity and lend more, and some lenders will remain conservative and will see the competition take their market share. And that's, if the American consumer is demanding debt, someone's going to lend to them. And I would, my hypothesis here and the position I'm taking is that I would strongly urge you to prepare to take advantage of the opportunity presented by this post-pandemic growth versus letting your competition do it. The third learning or lesson I want to take away, and this isn't just post 2008, this really is over the last 10 years, is the fact that I think that technology is underutilized by lenders, especially traditional lenders. And again, like I said, you're going to accuse me of saying that fintechs are great, and that's not necessarily what I'm saying. I'm using these as indicators of the hypotheses that I'm putting here in this case on the bottom bar here, that technology can enable better growth with better credit performance. So what we see here on the chart on the left, fintechs have actually seen their average FICO drop and their origination strategies shift down towards prime and even towards subprime, near prime and towards subprime. So you can see this subprime bar grow as a percentage of originations for fintech loans. Traditional lenders, on the other hand, stayed very stable through this period. And this is 2016 through 2019. FICO stayed almost flat. The proportion of loans that were in prime, near prime, subprime, deep subprime were pretty consistent over those 4-year periods. And so what would you expect to see? You would expect to see fintech losses increasing relative to traditional loans. In fact, we see the opposite. Fintech losses through this period, again, from 15 through early 18, because we have a 12-month lag on the reporting, were pretty stable, consistently between 5 and 6% here. Traditional lenders, on the other hand, started to see losses uptick. So even though they were not necessarily lending down market or expanding their risk profile or their target population, traditional lenders saw losses increase to a point where they were higher than fintechs by this measure. And so again, I'm not trying to just compare banks to fintechs, but I'm using it as an analogy for more agile, technologically enabled lenders versus slower, more kind of stuck in the past lenders. And I think if any of you have worked at a bank, you know that decisions happen more slowly. Banks are generally not considered agile. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think the regulators don't want banks to be agile, so a lot of it's due to the regulation and the compliance restrictions placed on large bank lenders. But for whatever reason, banks are not agile, and I would argue if you are working at a smaller lender, if you have the ability to be agile and to grow smartly, 2021 and 22 will present a great opportunity to do that. And so again, kind of just positioning how I think about where we are today and trying to learn from 2007, 2008, 2009. What I saw happen there, and I think we've all seen it, unemployment rose through this period. I have this unemployment bar on the bottom. Recession hits, lenders contract. That's typical. That happened in March 2020. Pandemic hits, lenders contract. That's universal. However, you can see and I chose to use unemployment here rather than GDP because I think it tells a sharper story, but I could have used GDP here. As unemployment continues to go down, as the economy continues to grow, as lending becomes safer, someone's going to come in and fill that gap. In the post 2009 era, that was fintechs. And now I'd argue that we have a very similar opportunity coming to us today. So we saw this huge spike in unemployment. We've rebounded quite a bit. We're not yet close to pre-pandemic unemployment levels, which were extremely low by historical standards. But 6% unemployment is not bad. You would have taken it in 2008 for sure, and you would have taken it in the 1990s, that would have been generally considered a baseline 5 to 6%. So what I will posit here again is that this will continue to come down, even if it's slow. And I think that will present a great opportunity for lenders that choose to both be more aggressive on originations, but more importantly, be adaptable or agile. And there's always, we're credit professionals, we're always looking for indicators that might be time to contract, might be time to pull back. I'm not suggesting that we take our eyes off of that. However, I am suggesting that it is time to really reassess your tools, and if not open up originations today, position yourselves to open up originations in the coming months. I'm going to go ahead and share those poll results. We got to 79% voting, so I'm going to end the poll and share those results. Just coming back to it, we stayed exactly the same on that economic bullishness, 26% long slug, 51% baseline. Sorry, I'll share the results. 23% fast return. Current origination strategy, more conservative was the winner, very similar to the percentages I quoted earlier on. Are you well positioned to grow? Again, 3/4 of you think you are. And the reason for holding back is this general uncertainty or cautiousness. But again, I think that probably is a catch-all as well for people who didn't have the concerns of the first two. I'll keep sharing those if you want. You can probably close that window. And then jumping into, okay, what does this mean for you? Wrapping up with my last couple of slides here. What are my recommendations? And then we will get to Q&A. I forgot to remind you, when sharing those results, please feel free to pop any questions you have into the Q&A box. I should have about 10 minutes at the end to address them. But what I want to come back to, and this is not meant to be, a panacea. I am not trying to say I have all the answers and I can present that in a 45-minute slide presentation. What I am saying is there's an opportunity to grow and to win in 2021 and 2022. And I would strongly recommend that those of you who would like to grow and would like to win, do some of these things and start thinking about that, and start thinking about how can you make sure that your strategies, your tools, and your organization are positioned to take advantage of the opportunities that I expect will be presented. So 3 bullet points I want to hit here. First of all, go customer centric. What this means is if you tightened originations, or more importantly, if you put hurdles to apply in place in 2020, it's time to start rethinking those. So again, like I said in one of my blog posts, I recommended putting in income verification steps pre-approval in 2020, because we knew that a lot of people lost their jobs. Though it might be time to loosen those or remove those, or only have them for certain subsets. Because if you don't, your competition will. I can assure you that the opportunities presented over the next 12, 24 months will lead to a loosening of credit criteria. And we all know the harder you make it to apply, the fewer applications you get. That's true in a good time or a bad time, but it's especially true in a growing economy when lenders are out there trying to grow aggressively. On top of this, and it's easier said than done, obviously retain your best customers, but I do want to call this out. I think it's not just a risk of losing new originations. I think that we've seen creative strategies. We've seen very, very rewarding loan terms for customers, especially with interest rates at historic lows. We're going to continue to see that. And I think it's important for you to not just worry about losing market share in terms of growing new customers, but also losing your existing customers to other lenders who are willing to give them more favorable terms. One thing I would really encourage you to look at if you have a credit card portfolio is look at credit limits. Is there an opportunity to increase credit limits to quote unquote reward your customers that have continued to pay, that are that you have evidence or reason to believe that they are have been continuously employed through this period? Why not make some moves now to make them feel more loyal to you? Then evaluate your toolkit. Again, easier said than done, but I do think that two things are going to be very important in enabling agility in 2021 and 2022, and that is first and foremost making sure your risk assessment tools work. And that's, again, easier said than done. But this is where, data science professionals can do rigorous testing. We at Scienaptic had done some modeling early in 2020 around splitting out the most stable versus least stable consumers in a given credit card portfolio. And we're able to show pretty significant risk splitting within a FICO band of people who had presented indications that they were living close to the edge, and this is all pre-pandemic, versus those who had presented indications that they were very stable and not living paycheck to paycheck, or over indebting themselves relative to income. And I think there are good indicators out there. I don't think this is a rocket science problem, but it does require data science professionals and a lot of data. The other thing I'll call out is assess the agility of your decision engine. So one of the things that has hamstrung a lot of lenders, and I know I've experienced this in the past, is just the ability to implement change. So being a credit professional, I know about fighting for IT resources, fighting for development resources, understanding that sales gets, anything helping fuel sales will get the IT and dev resources in a limited resource environment. And so what I would encourage you to do is reassess now, maybe before your sales team starts going crazy about growth. See how agile your decision-making tools are. So can you easily open up originations? Can you easily implement a new scorecard? I mean, I've worked at banks, I've worked with banks. I know about the 12+ month time frame from building the initial new scorecard model to actually getting it implemented in production. And that's part of why we saw banks lose significant market share to fintechs in the last 10 years. And I think you probably know how agile your tools are or not. So I don't think this is a huge exercise, but I do think it's important to think about that and see if you have confidence that your decision engine and your ability to implement new models, new scores, new cutoffs is something that can be done easily, or will take so much time that you actually lose any opportunity while you're waiting for that change to go. And then finally, test, learn, relearn. I want to stress this as well. I'm not arguing here that we should just all of a sudden open up and approve everybody. I'm a big believer in test and learn. I would encourage you to start to test on the margins. So again, in that example I gave before, where say pre-pandemic you were approving down to 620, you've tightened it today to only approve down to 680. Why not start approving 30%, 40% in between 620 and 680 today to start to get those learnings and measure your tools and see how well or not your risk assessment tools are working and are going to hold up post-pandemic. You're going to want those learnings 12 months from now, I can assure you. And then again, coming back to the agility mindset, can you assimilate those learnings and update your strategies quickly? That's going to be key. So what can you do now? Where can you get started? I don't want to belabor these points. And again, I don't want to act like this is super easy to do. I just want to encourage you to position yourselves to take the opportunities presented by what all indications today are what's going to be a growing economy over the coming months and hopefully years. So one, first and foremost, reevaluate your application processes. If you put in place hurdles to apply, if you made it more difficult to get a loan from your lender, reevaluate those. See if they're actually adding value. See if you can remove them, at least for some subset of your client base or your target customers. And maybe the place to start is with existing customers. Second is assess your credit decision engine through the lens of agility. Are you able to implement changes quickly and efficiently? Are you going to, if you build a model in say March of 2021, is it going to go into production before January of 2022? I think you probably know the answer. And if the answer is no, one, I'd say get started now then on building that model. But two, I would say really assess your credit decision engine and see if there are other opportunities if there are tools out there on the market that can enable agility, enable you to bypass the traditional paths required by your organization. And then finally, rebuild or retool your existing risk models. So evaluate them, make sure they're holding up and that you expect them to hold up post-pandemic, which again, we're not there yet, but we do, I think there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And often what happens is when you tighten credit, you actually don't have the ability to see what's impacted or how well your models are going to hold up when you want to loosen them again because you've not booked any customers in the higher risk bands that you tightened. So if you were not following a testing agenda in 2020, and I wouldn't blame you if you weren't, I would strongly argue that you sooner than later start to test on the margin and start to open back up, at least in a limited capacity, to book some accounts in the high risk sectors that you may have not wanted in 2020, so that you can reassess your underwriting scorecards and potentially modify them if necessary. And probably, you know, the life of a model is only say 24 to 30 months anyway. I'd imagine not many of you underwent a model rebuild in 2020, and so it's probably time to look for a model rebuild starting this year anyway, just because of that lost year we had last year. But with that, I will wrap this all up. I'll just reiterate, we're here to help. Scienaptic is, if you're not familiar with us, we are a credit decisioning engine tool. We do think that we offer a lot of the agility needed that I've talked about in these last few slides, but we're also machine learning and AI experts, and we can build custom tools for lenders to use when making when updating their credit decision strategies. So with that, I will again remind you to go ahead and feel free to place Q&As in the Q&A box if you have any questions. And I see quite a few here. I have about 10 minutes, so I will try to address as many as possible. First question here, what opportunities do you think machine learning can create to deal with the current environment? So one of the things that I really like about machine learning models, and I will admit that before joining before joining Scienaptic, I had very limited experience with machine learning models. But one of the things that I really like about them is, first and foremost, they are much sharper of a tool than a traditional logistic regression or linear regression model. They are able to micro subset. We've implemented models with 2,000 decision trees, and so what machine learning can do is compartmentalize and organize your customer base in a way that a human can do on a very large scale, a machine learning tool can do on a micro scale. So I can very easily, if I looked at 100 applications, I could probably pretty easily bucket that into 3, 4, 5 groups of customers that looked alike. But I couldn't do it on a replicable scale at 1,000 plus subsegments, and I also couldn't do that in real time. And that's what machine learning can do. In terms of current environment, I think all models are going to be tested by the 2020 data. It's probably best to avoid 2020 in a lot of your build samples because of the artificial indications created by government assistance and the kind of moratoriums on reporting delinquencies. So I would probably suggest steering away from 2020 data for the most part. But machine learning models, I consistently see them outperform traditional logistic regression models and without much difficulty and without requiring anything a logistic regression model doesn't have. Here's another question. Is AI applicable to small lenders, or would large lenders tend to gain the most from it? That's a great question. I think definition of large and small is important here. If you are a lender doing 50 applications a month, it's going to be difficult to build any kind of model, logistic regression, linear regression, or AI ML. The long answer is that more sample is always better. And again, that's true of logistic or AI ML. What we like to see is uh, in a risk model build sample, we like to see, rule of thumb, I think for logistic regression was 1,000 bads. For a machine learning model uh, to get the full power, you probably need a little more than you need in logistic regression. Maybe that's 1,500 or 2,000, but you can absolutely build a machine learning model with 1,000 bads. And so what I would say is, if you can build a logistic linear regression model on your population, then you can absolutely take advantage of AI ML tools. And again, this is a lot of what Scienaptic does when we engage with the client, is that we look at your existing portfolio, we assess the sample you have and assess our ability to build a custom model. We also do have some off-the-shelf solutions for smaller lenders that don't have sufficient sample to build a true custom AI ML model, but we can build you a semi-customized score for your population and for whatever lending products you're offering. Copy here about copy of the deck available. I think that we will follow up with you. Feel free to email me, but I'm sure that someone at Scienaptic will follow up with you following this presentation, and in that you'll get an opportunity to get a copy of the deck. Another one, I would like to open up lending by 20 to 30% in the next 6 months. How can you guys help? Call us. Again, what we typically do in an engagement is we'll look at your historical portfolio performance, where you have sample and how robust it is, and then we'll build a customized solution, not just a model, but a full strategic recommendation about your origination strategy. And I would say, I mean, I'm not going to promise this, but I have yet to see a deployment of a strategy we've configured that had less than a 10% increase in originations while keeping risk constant. Another question here around, another one around the presentation being sent out. Another one, I don't have a data science team. How do we make models and update them? Well, I would encourage you not to build a model if you don't have a data science team. That's where you're gonna, if you have enough sample and sufficient data to build a model, then that's where you're probably gonna wanna rely on a third party. Another question here, what's the difference between AI and ML? It's a great question. I'll give you my answer. I'm not, admittedly not an expert. Like I said before, Scienaptic, I had not worked with AI ML models very much. AI stands for artificial intelligence, machine learning. ML stands for machine learning. The way I use the terms is that AI has two things that machine learning doesn't necessarily have. AI usually indicates a neural network model, which we have built and deployed in the past. It is a modeling technique. In fact, we find that it's doesn't provide necessarily any lift over some of our preferred techniques like gradient boosting. But generally, when someone says AI, they mean a neural network model, which works slightly differently from machine learning, which can include random forest and gradient boosting techniques along with AI. The other thing that tends to be true for both, but more, I think more of a accepted requirement for AI is that the model continues to learn and learn real time. So the example I always give is, say when I make a Google search, let's say I live here in Dallas, let's say I type in good Italian restaurants in Dallas into Google. Whichever ones I click on, that is informing that algorithm so that the next time one of you comes in and types Italian restaurants in Dallas, your response will be shaped by the clicks I made. And that all happens real time. And that is something that that generally is considered artificial intelligence, like a human thinking real time. For credit risk models, that's less the case. We know with credit risk, we get one data point of feedback a month, whether a payment is made or not. Usually people don't, unless you're in deep subprime, don't go delinquent in the first 3 months after making a loan. So your build sample, your observation period is generally at least going to be 12 months post booking. And so when you build a machine learning or AI model in credit risk, you're not having that instantaneous update. It is not learning quote unquote learning every day, or even generally every month. That's probably overkill for a credit risk model. Usually when we're reevaluating models, that would be on a quarterly or often semi-annual, every 6 months basis. We would feed back in payment data and let the model update and learn. The idea being that it's much easier for machine learning or AI model than a logistic regression. Another question here around, oops, sorry. Oh, are we working with credit unions at the moment? Can I share a few pointers about their business case? Yeah, so we're very excited to announce a credit union partnership with GISA Credit Union out of Washington State. And we I think recently made that announcement maybe last week in a press release, and I'm working very closely with that team to build them custom machine learning models. We're really excited about expanding into that space. The use cases is really all the things I've talked about here in this presentation. So we will be building them custom models based on their historical data. Their working with them has been nice relative to your average lender, in that they have pretty good historical data stored on all of their applicants, which makes the model building process easier. But even above and beyond that, we expect to announce several more credit union partnerships here in the coming weeks and months, and absolutely that's a great use case for us. Most credit union lending happens in the auto space, and auto, both near prime, prime, and subprime auto is another area that we generally specialize in. I have worked on several auto lending clients, and now with the credit union space, we're going to be doing a lot more auto. GISA does do all sorts of lending, not just auto, but I think that is their biggest portfolio. I think I have time for maybe one more question. Savings are up. Why would people need credit in the short term? Are you certain that the drop in credit coming off this recession is due to being risk averse? So I'd say that savings are definitely up. I showed that in the presentation. Why do people need credit? Like I think I said in my presentation, I'm confident in the American consumer's ability to spend more than they make, and I don't say that to knock them. I think that buying a house without saving up, several $100,000 is the right decision. Taking a loan to buy a house is a smart decision if you can afford the payments. Similarly with the car, I don't save up $45,000 before buying a new car. I buy it on a loan, and so I do think American consumers will continue to use credit as a way to manage their finances. And the savings probably means that we might see a slower ramp up in lending volumes, but I fully expect the Americans to borrow again. And then the last part of that was, am I certain that the drop in credit coming off this recession is due to being risk averse? No, I think a lot of it is due to, like I said, just the inability to spend. If people aren't traveling, if people aren't going to restaurants, if people aren't doing a lot of quote unquote discretionary income activities, savings naturally go up, especially for those in the highest earning brackets. And that's where I think there's a lot of this pent up demand will come. And I think that presents a huge lending opportunity. With that, we are over time. So thank you all very much.